All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and we got a very special episode for you today. A very special guest is joining us, who Ben and I have been asking to come on for some time, and Ben, he delivers the goods, the nuts and bolts of actually how you retire and how you can actually see it in action. What else do we cover?
Well, it's building a property plan, Bryce, and also what we cover is I've got a money alert at the end of the show. You need to absolutely hang around for it. It could save you hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars.
This money alert is crucial, folks. Stick around for that. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance, and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and welcome back to you too, mate. How's your second week been back into February?
Well, you know, can you believe it's already the second week?
Yeah, I know, it's fine.
Second week of the second month of the year.
Yeah.
Just like that. Goes crazy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
How's everyone's New Year's resolutions going? Hey, hope they're all sticking fat, Ben.
Yes.
Hope they're all sticking fat. But stick around to the end of today, Ben, because you have got something that will be super important for people for this year to make sure that they don't give the bank money. So you must stick around for that.
Do I do the sound alert? Money alert. New segment we'll call it. Money alert. It's basically people wasting money or losing money.
Yes.
And we're coming after the banks.
Oh, what is it? I'm intrigued. Ben, I'm intrigued. You'll have to...
Can I give it offsets and credit cards? I'm going, more little clues about how they... so lots to learn.
Stick around to the end, folks. You must, I'll underline that, you must hear that. It's super important. Hey, RBA next week, Ben. You and Evan go live. They've been going super well. Everyone's been jumping on board. And so for anyone who doesn't realise, you two go live. You have a little cheeky chin wag in the lead up, then the decision drops, and then you also interpret that afterwards. So, and talk about cutting edge live from two of the brightest minds in this country around what impact that has. But Ben, is there been a more anticipated RBA announcement in the last 24 months?
No, I don't think there has. And there's also, I don't want to give too much away, but it's also one of the most politically sensitive ones. And I'm not going to give away the reason why. That's something that Evan and I will talk to in our upcoming RBA Live. But it is very, very politically sensitive. And I'll share a little bit more about, not only for the election, but there's a lot of other nuances in there that have been doing the rounds. And so it does make it for a compelling, and of course, Evan and I have got a $50 bet on this. Remember in November, I said February, and Evan said May. So we've got a pineapple on it. So that's also something that's going to be interesting to play.
Who's lunch on? You or him?
Well, that's right. So if we get a rate cut, then Evan's buying
lunch is on Evan, and if you don't, lunch is on you. So that sounds fun. So stick around for that, folks. We'll put a link in the show notes so that you can see where all that action happens and be a part of that. But hey, we've got a really cool episode today. We've been chasing this guest for some time, and he's finally decided to join us on the couch, and it's a ripper conversation. So before we get there, Ben, my Mindset Minute theme today is something that I've been pondering, particularly over the summer break, around our mindset. And listen to this. Your competition isn't other people. Your competition is your procrastination, your negative thoughts, your comfort zone. Compete against that. How cool is that? Just thinking about... Don't worry about the person over the fence. You've got to get your own house in order before you realise that you want to compete with other humans, because your procrastination, your negative thoughts, and your comfort zone is actually what you need to compete against. And I purposely did that in the lead up to today's conversation, Ben, because we are going to be talking about planning and having a look into under the bonnet on what planning looks like and some of the thought processes that people go through. So I thought that might have been a poignant little point for us. There's a little warm up there.
Wonderful lead in. Absolutely wonderful lead in.
Now, the person that we've been wanting to chat to is our very own David Robertson. And we wanted to chat to him about I say it in the conversation, Ben, but he's got this, he and the team have got this really unique view where think of the air traffic controller at the airport. They have a point of view that not many people have. They can see everything that's coming. They've got everything on the radar, and they also see everything that we see. And him and his team have a really unique perspective on building plans in this country that I think our listeners are really going to get benefit from. So you and I sat down with him recently and had a chat about that very process and other things, including, Ben, one of the case studies that we unpacked that's in our upcoming book, How to Retire on $3,000 a Week, the Property Couch's Playbook for passive property investing. So without any further ado, let's cut to the recent conversation you and I had with David Robertson. All right, Ben, we're very excited about today because we, for two reasons. One, we are going to have our head of property wealth planning on the podcast, which you're going to introduce shortly, to talk about all the scenarios that we go through on a day-to-day basis, building out plans. But number two is we're going to showcase one of the case studies that you and I put into our latest book, How to Retire on $3,000 a Week, the Property Couch's Playbook for Passive Property Investing, Ben. So just a little reminder that Spotify or YouTube, because lots of visuals, but we're going to do our best to make it for audio. But before we go any further, Ben, it's time for introductions, I think.
Yes, well, the great man standing right next to me right now. So there's a little bit of a backstory, Bryce, because David originally started as a client of ours. So came in, got a plan done, and then obviously said, I really love what you do here. I really love the idea and the meaningful work, and it's really fascinating for me after a very, very successful and decorated career in our armed forces. And then ultimately, you became one of our qualified property investment advisors, shooting the lights out. Clients absolutely loved him. His strategies were first class. So it was obviously cream always comes to the top. So then as I stepped away from the day-to-day running of the property planning division, here we have now David basically has been in charge now for many years. How long's it been?
Yeah, quite a few. I think it was back 2020.
Yep.
No, we were in lockdown when it happened. That's what I remember.
There we go.
Yeah.
So that was the trigger.
Deep in Melbourne lockdown.
Yeah, and so now David leads a team of our qualified property investment advisors who do all of our brilliant planning work in terms of the financial transformation, building those wealthier tomorrows and helping people work through those 7 grades of financial well-being towards financial peach, and then obviously towards financial contribution if they get to that ultimate 7th grade. So, mate, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
We've been trying to get you on for a while.
Mate, he's elusive, Ben. Hey, he's elusive.
Yeah, look, didn't expect to be on the podcast years back when I joined in Power Wealth, but you've dragged me here. So.
I think about
obviously successful property investor as well. You know, we should also basically say that, yeah, very much a successful property investor in his own right, and following your plan. You know, I remember in your case that, you know, you weren't in your forever home.
That's
when
right.
you first got here and you had some investments and you had to pivot a few things.
Didn't have kids yet, lots of moving parts, and yeah, we're pretty close to on track.
Yeah, you are. It's funny how plan to become what you plan to become actually works.
Well, it's definitely Dave's personality type to be on track. But hey, Dave, quick one. Did you talk about money over the dinner table?
Yes, a little bit. You know, when I was a kid, I always remember money being a concern. Just how it was spent, how much did my parents spend, and so on. But it didn't stop them from taking us on holidays. And so I've had a pretty privileged background. I remember as a kid getting on holidays up to the theme parks all the time and over to New Zealand. So they were diligent with their daily spending to build up for those family holidays, I think, and that's something that I took away.
Very good. Well, last week, mate, we had on our podcast, we had a listener go in on SpeakPipe and gave us a question around had been invested for about 20 years and had underperformed, and was thinking about keeping the property for another 15 years, just hopefully see it come through. It was a studio apartment. And Ben and I thought it'd be nice to start today's conversation with you, because I guess that particular listener was in the bucket of needing to fix a bad haircut. And so we really want to talk to you about, you see lots and lots and lots of different scenarios across your desk and the team's desk. Can you put down to one or two main things that you observe around what you need to fix the most when people come in, when they've had a swing out of it themselves and need some help to maybe course correct?
Sure. In terms of fixing, it really comes down to two categories. There's the ones that have received bad advice and purchased the wrong type of asset, potentially taken out way too much debt, and it's just not suitable for their circumstances. The other category is where they haven't received advice and they've just gone off to do it themselves, thinking, all property goes up. So I borrow what I can and I go out and purchase. But there's been no consideration for sequencing or what's coming up further down the track, whether that's kids, whether that's they don't have the family home yet. And so in those cases, it's often about taking a step back to reset, then to be able to get it right.
You get a bit of that, don't you, in terms of there's the classic, I used to own an investment property, but we sold that before we started a family, or, we went a bit early, or whatever that might be. Again, it's a demonstration of that planning not being sequenced correctly.
That's right. We'll speak to a lot of people that would say, we've owned property in the past. And then there's a big backstory to what happened.
What typically has happened?
Well, they haven't thought of the future and what's coming down the track. And so they've had to upgrade the family home, which has required selling everything to get the family home, because it's a lot more expensive in the areas they want to live now. So thinking about where you want to live and trying to tackle that family home first, or as soon as you can, is often is more desirable than jumping straight into investments. Or if they're young, there's career changes, there's changes to where you're living in cities and so on, and that just hasn't been thought through fully on what their circumstances is going to look like.
Yeah, and the performance of the asset hasn't gone to what they like. If they are thinking, okay, we're not in our forever home, but we'll sneak in an investment property, and then they buy in their local backyard, and then that doesn't deliver what they needed to deliver. So ultimately, then they're 5 years in, and then now the pressure's on their forever home purchase, and then ultimately it's about, all right, well, what's the hard decision here, because we can't hold all of the properties. So what does that look like? So I think it is, again, it's about sort of really starting to think in that 5 to 10, 20 year sort of range, and then start to organise your priorities around that story.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And when you've got kids, you've got more expenses, so your borrowing capacity is probably less than what it used to be. Just thinking about all those steps.
Dave, what about you get that you're kind of like the air traffic controller, right? You get to see from a higher altitude than most. What about some of the themes across states? And by that I mean, we get a cohort of people from New South Wales versus a cohort of people from WA and South Australia, and they've all got their own unique challenges. And in particular, maybe if you could kick it off with, it's a bit harder for the New South Wales crew to factor in a principal place of residence and investing. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, it sure is. There's differences in different states and where you want to live. And the price to acquire your own home to live in is the major factor there. Incomes are different in different states as well, so that plays a little bit of a role. Cost of living can be slightly different, but using Sydney as an example, it's very expensive to get that home. So that becomes a major piece of the strategy. How are we going to acquire that home? If you compare that to, I used to compare it to Adelaide. The prices have gone up a fair bit there, but I suppose you still could compare it to Adelaide. Still cheaper than Sydney. there. So getting the family home is often less of a challenge there. So it just requires some specific planning and focused on their circumstances, looking at their incomes, their expenses, and coming up with a way how we can get that home.
And Bryce, I mean, we talk about, fixing bad haircuts. So we are barbers, and we always think that we can always fix anyone's haircut. That's natural, right? So we've got a self-interest here. But I think one of the things that I'm super proud of the team, and I'm super proud of the sort of solutions that we put out in front of people, is this idea that if I go and see other businesses, there's no real discussions around, are you in your forever home?
Mm-hmm.
There's no modeling around renovations or any of that. It's just pure modeling around the investment property. And I think there's a message in that, in the sense that I think a lot of people don't realize that when you do get a property plan done with us, there's so much more to factor into that. So we're talking about, upsizing to forever homes. We're talking about renovating. We're talking about private school fee. We're talking about all of these things that derail a classic property strategy that you might get from a generalist who's just sitting there going, well, okay, that's the money I want to work with. That's your borrowing power. Let's get one now. Let's get one. And they're not factoring in any of those ongoing costs or the those bigger ad hoc costs that can also come into that. And I think that, that's just a reminder out to our community that, it's not just about investing in property. It's about lifestyle by design. And I think that also flows in our book quite nicely, Bryce, in terms of the fact that we're sort of trying to anchor it into, designing what you're trying to do and then putting property investments sequentially and optimized around that, rather than sort of saying, okay, I'm just going to buy 3 investment properties and that's going to fix my problems, or that's going to make me happy or healthy. It just doesn't work like that. Life always gets in the way. And to your point, those people that we come and see, had a false start or haven't got the results that they need to do, we're fixing those bad haircuts, aren't we?
Exactly right. I often compare it to a diet, where if you're given a really strict diet, most people will ignore it after a couple of weeks. You need to come up with a balanced approach, and investing in property is not isolated to the rest of your life. So we need to look at it all together. And as you said, those big ticket items in people's lives around schooling, renovations, holidays, and even career, that needs to be considered when coming up with a plan to invest in property. Otherwise, they'll just fall off the wagon, or they'll ignore it and not take any action. So it's coming up with that balanced approach. And everyone's different. Some people want to be a bit more aggressive than others, but it's what's suitable for that client.
Dave, in the book we did 7 case studies. One of those was a Rentvestor. And we're not going to go into all the nuts and bolts of it today, but I'd love for you to sort of plant a seed for our community on what's some of the things that Rentvestors don't think about when they're planning a rentvesting strategy that can sort of make it a bit like the Titanic, that's hard to pivot down the track.
Sure. It's a difficult strategy, the rentvesting strategy. It can work for some, and it needs to be a particular mindset to make it work. But the big thing that's not thought about or not considered is rents generally will go up over time. Whereas if you have a mortgage, the mortgage will go down over time and you pay it off. So by the time you get to retirement, hopefully you're mortgage free if you did own your own home. Whereas if you're a renter for life, those rents are continuing to go up. So once you do retire, the cost of rent is a large chunk of your overall passive income there.
Yeah, because that's the pure definition of rentvesting, right? The pure definition of rentvesting is you will never
rent for life.
Yeah, you won't basically, acquire a home. There's a lot of strategies or people talk about rentvesting, but they're basically saying, let's buy 2 or 3 properties or 4 properties, let's hold them for a decade, and then let's sell them all, and let's take all of those proceeds and put it into a deposit for a home.
Correct.
Right? And that, that sounds super sexy, and I see a lot of influencers talking about. In fact, I saw one hit my desk from Brendan the other day, where the lady come to us for a second opinion, and you should have seen this, Bryce. It was unbelievable, and we might actually take a deeper dive into it in a future episode. But it was like 7 properties, all in absolute entry level areas with ridiculous yields and with ridiculous unrealistic growth strategies, all then sold to buy a $2 million property in Sydney, in 10 years or something. It was just like, wow. I look at that strategy and I think, what's the likelihood of this strategy working?
Yeah.
One, I've got to get every one of those 7 properties nailed, right? To actually deliver what they do. So even if 3 of them deliver, I'm miles off, right? So it was just one of those interesting moments where I'm like, it's an unregulated industry. These people are saying that they're qualified to give property investment advice. If they've done the QPA course through PIPA, I would suggest that there's no evidence in that training or those modules to suggest that these aggressive strategies are sensible.
Yeah.
But they sound good when people come to you, and then you get a reality check from a mob like us who says, we're probably a little bit skeptical on that. We've had 30 years of doing this, and we've had, our combined knowledge across our team is over 100 years of investing experience. So you would just then think about going, would you deliver that in a plan to a customer and feel confident that it's going to happen?
Not at all. Not even from a borrowing perspective.
Yes.
7 properties in 10 years. There's been no consideration for how's that going to. How are the costs of that going to be covered? And as I said earlier, most people, as they get older, their expenses go up. So depending on interest rates, you've probably got the best borrowing capacity you can now, depending on your career and trajectory. So just assuming you're going to continue to be able to buy properties every couple of years, it's not a realistic strategy. But it's exciting, so it gets the clicks.
Oh yeah, but don't forget now, the last sort of 6 to 12 months, the fad has been in trusts. Right? So all of a sudden now it's like, well, I've got a solution for you there for borrowing. I'm going to set up multiple trusts for you, and then you've got to have to get your accountant to sign a letter off to say that this is basically, you're going to be able to afford this, or this thing can wash its own face. Now, in some cases they will wash their own, but in a lot of cases that, this is that whole point about getting into too much debt. And then, and whoever's making those recommendations are mortgage brokers who get to write the loans and make money off that, tax accountants.
And usually get kickbacks.
Yeah, and they're getting kickback. And then ultimately the tax accountants who are going to charge a lot more for the tax advice that you would normally, if you're buying in your personal name, it's a lot cheaper and cost effective to do that. You don't have all of the rules and regulations associated. So to me, it's like, okay, this is the fringe element that's creeping in. But to your point, it sounds sexy, and it's going to make me, look. So we always just be very careful, people. It's not our first rodeo. We're very careful in terms of playing with other people's money. It's not our own money. And the likelihood and probability of the strategies need to be stress tested as part of that. And we're always trying to continue to stress test our assumptions to try and make sure that they're going to play out. But like everything that we do, we've got, from just a quick memory, there's probably 8 or 9 different risk focuses that we focus in on, and we've brought climate risk into that now as well. We talked about that last week. And so we're just getting, if governments do come in and make the rule changes or they change the game, that will have impacts on us. So even with the best laid out plans, you're still potentially going to have things that are out of your control versus in your control. So we're really interested in making sure that we can control the controllables that we look after.
That's right. Yeah, you can't predict everything in the future, but what we will do is we'll use some conservative assumptions, and we'll err on the side of caution rather than a high risk approach there.
I guess the other thing too is it forgets people's state of mind too, Dave, because the facts are not just made up. The facts are that less than 1% of all property investors have 6 or more. So that strategy that we're talking to here would put this person in the apex of property investors in this country, including some who've had decades and decades of experience. So it's reckless, to say the least, to even suggest that. Whereas, I think Ben and I, our sweet spot where we think the magic gets done is that 2 to 4 property range, and ideally 2 if circumstances allow. So what about I guess, if our main demographics that we look at are, couple with young kids, and we're going to go through a detailed example of that shortly, Dave. You're going to work through that, but we've got a couple. Let's talk to the couple with older kids. What's the number one thing that's running through their mind when they come and sit in front of you and the team, as to whether or not they should invest in property and build out a bit of a roadmap for how to do it?
Yeah, look, when you're talking about the couple with older kids, it's often getting to a stage where they're seeing that their expenses could be reducing soon, with kids finishing high school and potentially moving out. But a big concern that I think nearly all Australians are probably having is how their kids are going to get in the market, and their kids going to be okay. So even though their expenses might be reducing, they're thinking further down the track. And they, first and foremost, most people want to make sure that they have their own retirement secure there. So they're not going to be a burden on their kids. But then they want to help their kids, whether it's with weddings or with a car, or even help them get into the property, because we're just witnessing prices continue to go up. So they've got these concerns around how their kids are going to be able to do what they've started to do.
And property investing is largely mindset as well. So you've got to kind of think about, well, they're starting to have thoughts around, I've left it too late, I'm already embedded in my, old false belief thinking. How do you and the team sort of navigate that fundamental question around, have I left it too late?
Correct. Yeah, it can be a common question for people once you're starting to get, age 40 plus. You feel like you're getting closer and closer to retirement. So is it too late for me? And the answer is no. There's always something you can be doing to improve your cash flow, improve your money habits, and improve your overall wealth position there.
And so that time pressure is obviously something that comes up. But one of the things that I also see is the I want to renovate the home. It's a bit tired now, right? The kitchen and bathrooms and all of those things have, they haven't had a touch up in 25 years. They've actually served the family growing up through them, and now
they're a bit worn out.
Yeah, and now I want a bit more sort of time now. But then also is like, so is this house then fit for purpose for us? So it was the forever home when we had the large family, but do we look at downsizing? Do we look at some of those other alternatives? And I think that certainly plays into the sort of late 40s, early 50 clients that we're starting to talk to, and they have a little bit of security comfort around that as part of their model, we could potentially sell them out of their family home and downsize them, which gives a lump sum because it's principal place residence. Correct, yeah. And that can do a great job in terms of retiring a lot of that debt and just supercharge that passive income coming off the top of that.
Exactly. So they've got cards up their sleeve essentially still that we can play, but you'll see it's whether they're in their 40s, kids are getting older and moving out soon, or they're in their 30s and kids are just starting primary school. It's always a balance of personal spending, whether that's for renos or holidays or cars. It's always a balance of personal spending and what we're allocating for investing.
Yeah, because, okay, let's talk to that, right? So, typically, wouldn't it be great textbook if two life partners walked in, started chatting, and they were both on the same page? They're both free spirits with money. They want to invest a bit for now and a bit for future, but clearly my tongue is in cheek on purpose. What do you often see as who's carrying what when they come and chat to you about bucket lists and what they want to do?
Yeah, look, often there's one person that is very focused on the future and the investing, and we need to spend less. We can't go on this holiday. We can't spend, send kids to private school. We've even had conversations with clients around, can we have a second child or can we have a third child? So we don't want to be saying to anyone, no, you can't have a second or third child just for another investment property, when maybe you don't even need that third or fourth or fifth investment property. So generally you have one person that has the anxiety around, do we have enough? Will we have enough? Is there something more we should be doing? And the other side is, I want to live life today. I want to spend today. And so it's meeting in the middle there and coming up with a balance of both. So the clients can walk away excited knowing they will be okay. We're building a passive income, but we can still live and we can still spend comfortably today and do those family things that we wanted to do.
Is that the message to our audience, Dave, that what you just said there is once the invisible becomes visible, both sides actually go, oh, I can see your point of view. I can actually see how I'm going to get what I want, how you're going to get what you want. We meet in the middle, and it really becomes certain outside, in the wake of uncertainty, just by getting clear on the number.
100%. Yeah, and this is a numbers game, looking at projections, but more than that, it's an emotional game, and there's real emotion behind these habits that people have, and real anxiety, and it can go both ways. We've seen people that are just sacrificing too much, and not living today. You know, I've spoken to people working 2 jobs, living in share accommodation, and they're talking about getting their 4th investment property in early 30s. And so even showing them you've done great, you can ease up, is one of those light bulb moments for them.
Yeah. Also when like our book says $3,000 a week, right? And that's aspirational, and it's something that a lot of people will strive for. But I remember back, I think it was, I'm going to guess the episode, but we spoke to Sam on the summer series about 3 or 4 ago, and her financial piece was at $30,000 a year, mate, $575 a week. So talk us through the conversations, because clearly most of the people come into our business and they say, can you show us how to retire in 2,000 a week? Because that's the broad messaging that Ben and I have done for a decade. But can you talk a little bit to the folks who come in and say, actually, I don't want 2,000, 1,300's enough?
Yeah, look, everyone has different lifestyle aspirations, and whether someone is wanting 3,000 or 5,000 a week or 1,500 a week, we want to push them a little bit and ask why, and come up with a bit of reasoning and look at what they're spending today. So if excluding mortgage repayments and so on, if you're only spending 1,500 a week, do you really need to push so hard and work so hard to get to 3,000 or that higher number? So we do like to push people on that and come up with a realistic number that suits them, because there's always a compromise. Maybe we can get to 3,000, but that might be working another 5 years. So it's picking what suits you more. Do you want to retire a bit earlier? Do you want to stop work when you can? And 2,000's fine for you, or 1,500's fine for you.
I think when you get to that modelling stage where you've retired out the mortgage payments and you're looking at your consumption and your general living expenditures, there is absolutely that aha moment in terms of that, making that visible to them. But I also think there's part of that is like, okay, that's comfortable. But, a lot of the people who are willing to make these sort of delayed gratification things, they are looking for aspiration. But to the point, because they've potentially had some sacrifice along the way, they almost need to give themselves permission. They need to have the confidence, permission to actually spend a bit of that money. Like at the end of the day, our models are about delivering $3,000 of available cash every week for you to basically go off and live your life, covering all of the expenditure, all of the other existing debts, and all of the other sort of, holding costs that you might have as part of your investment. So it's 3,000 clear cash
for you,
and it's got for you, and then all of those other monies where if there's still debts to pay off and other holding costs we've actually factored all of that in. And so it's almost like, well, when did they actually have a moment, that they were looking at sort of having $12,000 a month, where they got free time to spend it. So it's then about them feeling like they've done the effort and they've worked hard. Now go and enjoy that. So because I think aspiring Australians do like this idea that if they can have a European holiday, or if they can do something that they haven't probably done before, they're giving themselves that opportunity, in those retirement years, not so much their twilight years, but in those retirement years. And I think that is an important story around this whole cradle to grave sort of effort that we're trying to bring together, which sort of leads me to the sort of next question. If we then start to think about couples who are double income, no kids, or even empty nesters, what are the sort of themes that are running through their minds around why they're doing what they're doing? What are their motivations to potentially get financial assistance in trying to build out a plan?
Yeah, sure. It just leads on from the last example where it's that conversation about is it too late?
For the DINKS, definitely.
They're looking down the barrel of retirement's getting closer and closer.
Yep.
They've had their compulsory super contributions. Sometimes they've spent a pretty good life up until now. They've been paying their mortgage, but not much else. And now they're having the realization: is that enough? Have I done enough?
Yeah.
What could I be doing with the last 10 years or so to improve that position?
Can I just jump in there? That is another, we all know that it's easier for money to make money, right? So for our community listening to this, if you're on really high incomes, there's a great chance that you're going to be able to amplify that, and the power of compound is going to put you into a certain level. But what we also see is that, those couples who might be on in excess of, say, 250 to 300,000 household income, which is sort of up in that higher end, they're living good lives. They're spending well. They're having international holidays and domestic holidays as well. They're burning through that cash. And if they're not putting enough money away, that's the other aha moment for them, right? In the sense that, okay, so when I do retire, I want to keep the same standard of living that I currently have.
Yeah,
but all of a sudden I don't have it anymore because it's like there's a shock here because they haven't built up passive wealth. They've used their exertion and their knowledge wealth to basically bring an income in, but they haven't put that into assets to basically penetrate and to allow that to generate that passive income.
Exactly right. They haven't needed to worry about their cash flow because every fortnight there's a big
lump sum coming in,
check coming in,
wages,
and they can spend it, and in a fortnight there's another one. And so sometimes you see with the higher incomes have more spending problems and money management problems, and we've got to tackle that before we're diving into properties.
Well, especially the ones who get the big bonuses. When conditions are good and economic, like, woo, I've just got a $25,000 quarterly bonus, and it's like, right, so we're into that and we're going to enjoy it. But it's like, well, how much have you just slam some debt down or get another asset that's going to give you an opportunity to make that money make more money for you later in life is a really powerful outcome as part of that.
Dave, let's talk to DINKS. Ben touched on it there. We kind of focused on empty nesters, but DINKS in terms of 20-something DINKS, 30-something DINKS, and 40-something DINKS. What are the unique challenges? And arguably, some of those are some of the more powerfully positioned people to take action. Because let's be honest, the three of us are all parents. Kids are expensive.
Double income, no kids, for everyone who doesn't know what the definition of DINKS means. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, to be very fair and honest, they can have it pretty good when there's no kids. It just frees up cash flow. So we want to make sure they're using that cash flow wisely. So again, coming up with that balance of spending now but building for the future, because as you mentioned, Ben, for the high income earners, your salary turns off at a certain point. Yeah,
they're gonna be flying up the front end of the bus if they've done well. Like if they manage that, there's no doubt. Again, what I said earlier, that you can just create more wealth for them. Yeah. Like they've got just more opportunity in front of them. But this is what we're also saying. We love the household that might have been in a lower socio-demographic who is willing to make some sacrifices, work hard.
That's right.
Get them into that position. So we love all customers that we bring to financial peace, but there is definitely a different approach based on borrowing power and how much surplus cash we've got to work with, and that obviously then plays in with the strategies that we have to design. So if I have got sort of lower incomes, what are some of the things we're looking at to help them get into the market? Because if they're not getting it at all, their money's not doing anything for them.
That's right. Yeah, and look, you've received feedback on the podcast as well, where a lot of the time with these people, it's just showing them that they can do something.
Yeah.
There can be a mindset out there for the lower income earners that it's just not for me, and so that education piece and showing them that there's something everyone can be doing to improve their situation. Obviously, a lower income, it might take a bit longer. But if you're in your 30s, you've still got a lot of working life ahead of you. So still planning
Time's on your side
and doing something now, you can get there.
So let's pivot to so by far and away the biggest grouping of questions that we get, Dave, because I trawl through them, right? So is have I started too late, which we've covered, and the other one is what if I've just recovered from a relationship breakdown? So clearly, I'm a divorcee. What are some of the unique challenges that they face, and what are some of the strategies that the team often plant seeds with this particular archetype or this particular cohort?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with divorcees, it can be it is a step backwards most of the time, where as a couple you've invested in a home, you may have had investment properties as well, and then everything's getting split. And so whether you walk away with a home or you walk away with just a lump sum, what we want to do is have a look at your position now. And if, say, for example, you've just got a lump sum but nowhere to live after that, we want to start with the basics really, and look at where can we live, what can we afford, get some accommodation, and then look at investments once we're building up the cash flow for investments.
Because I think that's a really important point, Bryce, because the property system, the tax system, everything favours owner occupiers, right? So if you are in a situation where you've received a lump sum, buying a home is really a very important element of that, because if we do invest straight away, that's going to be means tested and potentially going to impact any potential access to pensions and other sort of support services. So I think it really is important that, if someone's giving you advice after a divorce and you've got a lump sum of money, that the most important thing we would recommend is owner-occupied home first. Now, that still could be a townhouse or it could be a villa or something along those lines. You may not necessarily need a home. There may not be kids involved. There may be kids involved. I think that's important. Then off the back of that, okay, how can we supplement and build an income off the back of that? That's especially right. Like the customer's got a choice to make shares, other types of investments or direct residential property. And a lot of divorcees, I think from my experience on the female side, have looked more towards something they can invest in, they can understand, and property does potentially fit that bill.
Yeah, and they've got other challenges too. Like if we stay with the the female divorcee, through no fault of their own except biology, there's a period of time that they've had to invest in the family,
correct,
which means superannuation contributions are minimised, and then it comes to the end and they don't. Like quite often, it's like, wow, I don't have super. So, Dave, can you talk to that first of all, but also for a divorcee, $3,000 a week might not be the end game, because $3,000 a week is an end game typically, not always, but typically for two people to retire on. But if you plan to relationship, great. But if you don't, it goes back to our earlier conversation around how much you actually need.
Correct. And look, I don't think I've ever spoken to a divorcee that has said, I want 5 properties, I want $3,000 a week. They've usually just got the mindset of, I just want to be okay. I want to have somewhere comfortable to live. I want to be able to look after my kids and not be a burden on them.
Mate, well said. Hey, let's now pivot to talking about this particular case study.
Sure.
So we've got up on the screen here David and Elizabeth. Did you name that after us? In terms of David inspiration.
No, look, just a random coincidence. I thought about changing it so there would be no confusion
with us when we were doing the models. All right, so we've got.
We should set the scene too, Ben. Is we obviously asked, as part of our book, there's 7 case studies, detailed case studies. So we lay the foundations for people to actually know the big picture of property investing, but we also wanted to give tactics. So the 3 of us were very intricate in getting the case studies organised. So that's kind of setting the scene as to how Dave's played a part in that.
Perfect. I'll run through some of the details in introducing this couple. So Dave and Elizabeth here. Let me come down on the dashboard here. So you can see David's on an income of 155,000. Elizabeth on 56. So Elizabeth's working part-time. And in this model, essentially what's happened is the 2 kids, and they both just are now in primary school. So
young kids.
Correct. Young kids here, both are now in primary school. So they've made the decision for Liz to start work again on a part-time basis there. And look, a modest income there of 56,000. But what's really important with this returning to work part-time, if I continue down here, they're sitting on a surplus now of 4,000, let's just call that 4,400.
Mm-hmm.
If Liz wasn't working, they would basically just have their head above water. So that 56,000 has moved them up into sitting at a very healthy surplus there, just by returning to work a few days a week.
Giving them opportunity and potential. So Liz's, efforts of managing the family as well as basically bringing in just that 56 is about the future for her and her family. It's a sacrifice that she's making and the family is making as a unit. That in itself speaks volumes in terms of the typical type of decisions that households need to make to be able to move forward.
Exactly. And we know with our tax system here, the first $20,000 is tax free, and then the next 20 has a pretty small amount of tax on it. So that $56,000 income is a good amount of money in their pocket. So she's getting taxed at less than $10,000 overall on that.
Beautiful. Okay, so we've got a good summary of, and there's equity. We can see the equity here, $922,000 home, 56% LVR. So available equity at 80%, it's about $218,000 rounded.
That's right, yeah. So essentially up until this point, they've been focused on the family home there. So they've done well paying down the family home with a balance of 520 now. So great healthy LVR against the home. But like we spoke about with some of those examples, now they're asking the question of could they be doing something better? What else could we be doing?
Let's put our money to work. And I think it's really important to understand that every month we are modelling money in and money out, regular money in, regular money out, and also ad hoc income and expenditure. So let's go to the executive summary, Dave. And now, of course, there's a lot of rich information and all of that in behind what's happening. But for the benefit of obviously our podcast audience, we want to sort of just summarise what we found in terms of our recommendations.
Yeah. So what we've recommended for this couple to work towards that $3,000 a week passive income is we've got 2 investment properties in the strategy. And I'll just expand these here to show you. Investment property 1, we're going to purchase pretty soon. So they've got good surplus, good borrowing capacity, and plenty of equity. So they can go after that first investment property pretty soon. To achieve that investment property, we're basically going to borrow 106%.
Yep.
We've got the equity there. It's an investment, so it's deductible debt. So if we don't have to, we don't want to use cash for that. So we've got 2 loans in there, a standard 80% loan and your equity release to cover the remaining costs there. So what I'll quickly do is just scroll down here, and this is our timeline graph here, and you can see on the projections there, that's our first investment property. Pretty soon into the modelling, we've got that later this year, and you can see their cash balance doesn't drop from that because we're borrowing all the money. If we look at it from a surplus point of view, right, green line's our income and the orange line's our expenses. You can see they've got great surplus now, and post-purchase, they're still sitting on about 1,500 to 1,600 surplus after taking out those loans. Obviously, being an investment property, we're getting a rental income for that. That's helping there.
Dave, can I jump in there? Because last week Ben and I were talking to the concept of those two graphs that you just showed, the household liquidity and the cash flow. I wonder if you could lean in a little bit on that one in particular, because you're dealing with all day, every day. But for our community, particularly the ones who are able to watch, that's a key thing that you're looking to lean into, isn't it? To actually find where the gap between the green and the orange are, for you to decide where opportunity exists.
Exactly right. So this graph paints a really nice picture of the whole projections, their cash flow. So behind the scenes is those calculations every month, money coming in, tax going out, mortgage repayments going out, expenses and so on. That's all being calculated behind the scenes. We've even got inflation in there, so CPI. And what this is doing is giving us a quick visual, and we're looking at those gaps of expenses and income there. And if we are buying a property, we want to make sure that we've still got a surplus after that. So as you mentioned, cash flow, very important there. And the other one is our overall cash position there. So how much cash we're carrying, our emergency funds.
Yeah, we talked about that last week on the pod, in the sense that this is liquidity. This is, so you can see here, because even after that first purchase, the household income is still positive. Money in, money out, the surplus is still there. So you can see that value is growing. Correct. So you can see, as you hover over it, each month they're still building up that surplus. And then obviously that gives you that chance to, talk to about, how much breathing space we leave before we look at the second optimized purchase.
Yep, that's right. So we've got the second purchase out in 2028. So we've left a healthy gap between those purchases. What we do discuss with all our clients is it's good to have a date, but this date is based off the projections we've got in the model. And the model is using some assumptions. Yep. So we've got a growth rate on the property. We've got interest rates in there. We're assuming they stick to the plan with their spending. The reality is that some of those are going to vary. Yep. So in a good way or a bad way, we've seen plenty of people get 20%, 30% growth on their property. So the date's important. But what we like to assign with each purchase is more of a milestone or a trigger, rather than just get locked in on that date in 2028. So essentially for this next purchase, what we're looking for is we want to make sure we've got enough equity and appropriate cash flow to be able to borrow for that next purchase.
And it's always wonderful. Like, I've got a couple of examples where former clients of mine have rung me up and said, hey, when we said we were going to have our second child and the child was going to arrive in February, child's arrived in February. So you just love that, sort of those sort of examples where, we are sticking to our plan in terms of what that looks like. I just love those stories.
And let me just go back up to the investment property here. So second investment property that we're focusing on buying is what we call more of a balanced asset. So first one was really good cash flow. And so we wanted to focus growth.
Client had good cash flow.
Client had good cash flow. Yeah, the property itself is
correct.
Is negatively geared, but got it.
Good correction. Yep,
that's right.
The client had great cash flow. So the rent coming in isn't so much of a deal. But now with the second investment property, cash flow you could see was a bit tighter. So the yield we're getting from that property is more important. We need a higher rent to help support the loans. We're also further down the track in the journey. So we're getting closer to retirement, where ultimately what we want in the retirement is the income.
Yeah.
There. So the two properties we've got here, we've got a high growth focused property, and then what we call more of a balanced property there. And that's giving them a good combination of capital growth and overall rental income.
Great. So let's have a look at the debt story, Dave.
Before you go, Dave, can you just talk to the number there on the second property? That's how we factor in future value and present value. Why is that number so specific like that? I think that'd be a good takeaway, because
good point.
These plans are going to be meaningful, right?
What we do is, when we're talking to clients, we like to talk in today's dollars. Right? It can get a bit confusing for all of us if we're talking about value in the future, in whether 10 years, 5 years, 15 years. So when we're talking about property prices, or even our spending target of $3,000 a week, we're talking about in today's money. Then obviously we've got inflation, and with properties we've got growth on the properties. So what we had here is, in today's dollars, we had a 550 purchase there. And you can see we've applied growth on that. So by the time they are buying in 2028, we expect a 550 today would be let's call it 700 in 2028. And
the real importance on that for our community to understand is we're factoring in the debt level at that higher point.
Yes.
People who do these calculations back of envelope or aren't qualified property investment advisors are just saying, and then we'll buy the next one at 550. So roughly your debt's going to be. No, your debt's going to be, because the property is what we have to buy it in future value terms. So that ultimately is working out. So probably a good segue now into looking at that debt story. So if we go back down in and show the debt chart that you had here.
Yes.
Yep, perfect. The debt position. So we can start to see the ramp ups of those debt positions, and we can also see the personal debt, which is the owner occupied debt, being paid out there.
Correct.
And notice, what are we paying down first?
Personal debt.
We're paying down that non-deductible personal debt first, and then we're coming after that investment debt later. And one of the important things here is we've got all of these offset buckets against these loans. So as we fill up the personal debt loan bucket, that's also giving us that higher liquidity as part of that particular story. So I think that speaks volumes. If we scroll down and sort of wrap it up in terms of...
Sorry, Ben, can I just jump into that?
Sure.
For the people watching at home, what's interesting about the red reduction of debt, Dave, is it's perfectly in a line when you've retired out your PPR debt, right? So that'll be worth sort of double clicking for the people watching what's going on there.
Yeah, correct. As we've been saying, we want to focus on personal debt, the non-deductible debt first. So what we've modeled in here is we want to try and keep these investment debts at interest only. Even if there's a small premium on the interest rate, as long as it's a small premium, you still are better off keeping it interest only and focus on that non-deductible debt. And so that's why you can see these loans are not going down yet, and we're focused all on that personal debt. Once that's cleared, right now there's no need to keep it interest only. We could switch them to P&I and get a better rate. The main work that's getting done there is offset accounts, just filling up those buckets,
which is retiring out that debt. And remember, the Matt story that we spoke about last week in our Q&A episode, we were talking about manipulating loan amounts and terms to reduce cash flow to trap more surplus so we control more assets. The drum roll here when we do the side-by-side comparisons. So let's go down and have a look at those side-by-side comparisons. You can see what we're talking about here. So when David talks about the premium that you might pay for interest only on an investment purchase versus paying principal and interest, or the premium that you might pay in the example that we had last week where we said maybe consolidate your car loan in and potentially expand out the term of the loan to get that cash flow working. It's because we could get access to higher borrowing power and controlling two assets or controlling more assets. And you can see, so there might have been thousands or tens of thousands of dollars of additional interest over time, but you can just see the projections in terms of the compounding return there. It just brings home that message so strongly in terms of that was a good use of your money. If you're going to play around with manipulating terms to make repayments or interest-only period to make repayments cheaper, you must invest that money. It cannot be used for discretionary or personal use, because this story will be horrible. And in fact, you'll never get on top of your debts if you do that. So another important lesson for everyone in our community to understand.
Yeah, it's an important point. We do not want to be going interest only if we're going to spend that extra cash flow.
Yep.
And look, we've had some clients where we have recommended they don't go interest only because they've got a history of spending and bad debt there.
So build those habits and behaviours first.
Correct.
Or also if they're in their mid-50s, we actually want to start getting that debt out. We don't have as much time. So those repayments and potentially not necessarily buying at the higher price point. So we understand that that's going to affect borrowing power and what the price point that we can, but it keeps them in the game. And we're also potentially looking at those yield stories as part of that strategy that, property number 2 that David just showed us had a higher yield or quicker to cash flow positive story. And that's, so for someone who's, sort of in their mid-50s who's considering this, then that yield play becomes important given the time frame we have towards retirement.
Correct, absolutely. And so the side-by-side comparison here is you can see on the left, this yellow line, it's a bit hard to see, but that yellow line's the personal debt. So this is the scenario of do not invest in property. Essentially just pay down your debt. And so that personal debt they've got gets paid down in about 5-6 years. And then they've just got their super accumulating in the background until they retire. That's
a worst case model there, everyone. So what's happening there is they're spending all of that extra money once they become debt free. So they're out, there's no trapping of it. But again, we can have conversations with our clients about what percentage of additional surplus do they want to add to the live now versus the enjoy later.
Correct. Exactly right. We can adjust that surplus if they are spending more. But essentially, it's there to show the clients how would you look if you do nothing. If you do nothing and you don't focus on good habits.
Yep.
Over on the right here, we've got our strategy of buying 2 investment properties. First thing you can see is the debt stretches out longer, obviously, because we've purchased the 2 properties. But now we've got our blue bars here, which is our investment properties, growing over time and generating income for us over time, which they will turn positively geared and provide that income in retirement.
And then we summarise that by looking at those over the 10-year increments, and we've got a little summary here. Remember, these models can be 40, 50 years long, depending on the age of the customer we're looking at. But
the question, Dave, is do they retire on $3,000 a week, mate?
We're getting to there.
Come on, Bryce. This is our big reveal.
Absolutely they do. So we've hit that goal of $3,000 a week, spending money. So that's spending money for them. And we've done that just off the back of 2 investment properties, which I think is a really important point for the community to hear. You don't need 7 properties in 10 years.
What? 2?
2 investment properties. Plus they've got their superannuation.
Yeah. And you can see how ridiculous when you see indexation and how inflation works when you look at the nest egg numbers, and you can see them, in 20 years, 2048, the value of the portfolio is 7.8 million. But in present value terms, so that's what we were talking before about making sure that we bring everything in today's dollar terms. We're just basically looking at that and saying, okay, well, that seems a little bit more realistic in 10 years' time, 1.14 million versus 688,000. So there's almost been over a half a $1,000,000 gain there. And then over 20 years, that $500,000 gain now starts to look, I'm doing rough numbers in my head, about $2.2 million gain. And that's the power and magic of compound.
That's compounding
effect.
Yeah. So Dave, let's pause. Let's get you to unpack. So just so this lands, because we get this question a lot from people. That 3,000 is for them to use for what? And what about the tax bill? And what about any? Not in this case, a lot of investment holding costs because you're retiring out the debt. But if they had investment costs, let's really land this plane.
Yeah, good question. So what we're calculating here is $3,000 a week spending
in your hand.
not income that then gets taxed. It's this scenario is once they retire, they are spending $3,000 a week on their personal expenses. So outside of that, they still have property maintenance costs. If they did have debt, it would count the repayments outside of that as well. So it's $3,000 spending for you, which is a
Tax obligations.
yeah.
All of that is in there.
It's an important point because $3,000 income that then gets taxed would be a lot less.
Correct.
One final point on that $3,000, I just run a few quick calculations before this. That $3,000 a week income at retirement, that's made up of 60% from the rental properties.
Okay.
That's helpful to know, and that'll be in the book.
So you can
as part
imagine
of the story.
if you were drawing down from your super 60% less, how much longer that super balance would last for.
And this is then about, okay, all of a sudden the conversation. So let's go back to the family, right? The families who want to leave legacy. We also know there was a UBS report that came out around the number of mum and dad, the banks of mum and dad in terms of helping the next generation. This is legacy building, right? And this is family wealth building, and it's all part of building off the back of that. And we should never be ashamed of aspiration and being able to do that, because it just means the best opportunities for education, for health services. If one of us, or many of us in our family unit are having health battles, all of those things just become a lot easier, and then life becomes a lot better. And so I think it's really important. We know that Europeans and Asian communities have been doing this sort of family wealth building for a long time. We Australians are just starting to catch up with the concept of basically helping out the family unit as part of that. And I think, so what we're going to see here is, you can see also by the models, is that they really don't even trouble. They could potentially give themselves a pay rise. Like every year going on, they basically could take more cash in hand as part of that, or they can give some of that money as part of their will and last test. All of those things, they can even give some cash earlier than that, because obviously those properties keep doing the heavy lifting. So that is the ability to then, and then, off the back of this, hopefully they're training or teaching their kids how to fish, and that becomes really something that does start to build a dynasty of wealth throughout the course of the home, for the course of the journey of that household network, to be able to live comfortably and have those magical moments that we talk about.
Now, Ben, I see a problem here.
What's the problem?
Here's the problem. For 10 years, you and I have been trying to explain that concept, and Dave, who's resisted coming on for however long he has come on and explained it in a way that most of our audience probably go, why didn't you get him on earlier? Because
Sack me.
Sack me too, right, Dave? It's all yours. But I'm tongue-in-cheek a little bit, Dave, but I think what I want to say to the community is a lot of you will be listening to that in audio. I'm going to encourage you to go and find an opportunity to see that in video, whether it's YouTube or Spotify, because some of those charts that Dave has gone through and done so well are just incredible aha moments. Like they just visualize from a 30,000 foot level some of the key concepts around retiring debt, around looking for the cash flow, about household liquidity at the point where the property goes break even. They're just massive aha. So that's number one. Number two, Dave, is I think what you've done is really broken down for people and given them confidence that 2 properties and 60% is the rent, and we're not drawing down fully on our superannuation, and we're talking about future value. So therefore, we're factoring in all the borrowing. Like, just some of the concepts that you're going through are just are mind blowing. So again, I just want to encourage anyone in the community who has been listening to this. It's going to be well worth your time to go and find an opportunity to see that at the visual level. But I think we might finish with this, Dave. I reckon just to this graph and the break-even graph, I reckon are 2 good ways to conclude this.
Sure, we are. So what we're looking at now here, this is looking at the individual properties, not the overall portfolio. But here we're looking at this is the first property. Yep, we're looking at the first investment property they buy, and we've got a bunch of analysis in here, but I think an important one worth showing here. This is the cash flow of that property. So you can see it starts off in the red, negatively geared. But we ultimately want to get to cash flow positive, and we want to be living off the income. So you can see where that flips there, and then that property is now cash flow positive. And as the debt's retired even further, that cash flow just improves over the years.
And I think it's worth also mentioning to our community that we're very conservative in those assumptions. You may be getting cheaper interest rates. We normally have a 1.5% to 2% buffer rate on the interest rates of the day. So, you might be thinking, 15 years before it becomes cash flow positive. It's potentially going to be a lot closer. We also don't factor in depreciation. So all of those things will actually improve this number. But again, Bryce and I will tell you, we're super conservative, and we're very conservative when we're playing with our clients' money.
Correct. And the other point too, Ben, is again, we'll paint a visual for the audio listeners. On the left, it's showing red deficit. Then it shows break even. Then it goes green when it's positive. So that's kind of just throwing it back to the people that think that people utilizing negative gearing are parasites on the tax system. No, we get a leg up at the beginning and then we give it back at the end. Yep. So overall, it's net neutral, so that people can be self-funded, not relying on the government. And by having the investors in the market means that rents don't inflate. So it'd be nice. That image that's on the screen now, it'd be nice for that to be the universal image that the Greens use, that the politicians use, that everyone uses. I don't get political very often, but there you go.
There we go. And then you can see the equity that's sort of being generated across the portfolio as the debt's being retired and the value of those properties are going up higher. You can then start to see a summary of the assumptions that we've been using. And then you can also see a nice little tax benefit table in terms of, in the initial stage, in terms of how much tax savings you're going to have as part of that. Then ultimately, you can then start to see those projections around who's paying what. Mate,
you're doing great.
And then you've also got the offset on, offset off. So talk to us quickly about that.
Yeah, look, this is a pretty new feature that we've got in here to show. Well, it really shows the value of the offset account. So we can toggle on or off. And let me just go back up to investment property 1 here. So with all these graphs, we can toggle the offset account on or off. So I've just turned it off there, and you can see how many more years that property remains negatively geared.
Yeah. There. So it's about where we're stacking that money and reducing the amount of interest that we're paying. The quicker we can retire that out. But again, that's the trade-off. Accumulation phase versus debt retirement phase is sort of some of that model.
Mate, well, that's been terrific, Dave. We've just gone through just one of the case studies that will appear in our upcoming book, How to Retire on $3,000 a Week. So for anyone who wants to get on the waiting list to be advance noticed of that book, there will be a link in the show notes here. So if they click on that, we'll make sure that you get it in your hands before the general public gets it into their hands. But what Dave's just gone through with us today, there's 7 of them for all of those archetypes. We've covered the couple with young kids, the couple with older kids, the DINKS, the empty nesters, the single professional, the divorcee, and the rentvestor. So hopefully we've straddled most archetypes, Ben. We can't cover them all. Yep. But I think the point is that you'll probably be able to take a bit out of 1 or 2. And then obviously if you want it tailored for your own circumstances, that's where you'd seek advice. But Dave, first of all, thank you for coming on. And why did it take so long? We'll deal with that offline. But
it was easier than I thought. Thanks to both of you. That was it was great, and you do make it easy. As I've heard many guests say, you make it easy.
Well, that is definitely the compliment that we like to bank. But folks. So a couple of things. If you're still in the research phase, obviously put the details down. We'll send you a copy of the book. Or if you might be someone who is thinking, actually, I want to get some of that analysis done myself, we'll also put a link in the show notes to our business, empowerwealth.com.au. And Dave's team, they're all mentored by him. So they can go across the whole broad range of scenarios that you might have. So if that's you and you self-assess that you want to do something now, why don't you reach out and we can have a chat. But mate, we'll have to do this again, Dave. Ben and I have been making through case studies now for a better part of 18 months to 2 years. We might have found a new rhythm, Ben.
We might have, yeah. And the less work that I have to do in this space, the better, right?
All right.
I think that I'm handing the mantle over, right? The baton's going over.
Very good. Well, thanks again for joining us, buddy.
Thanks, Dave.
Great. Thank you.
There you go, Ben. That was that time actually genuinely flew, and I think I'm thinking the community should have got a ton of takeaways from that.
Well, do you see how proud I am and probably how much I miss that work?
Yes.
I mean, I believe we've got the best team in the country that does this work. I was in the cut and thrust of it for over 12 years there, but it's just great to see David and the team taking it to the next level. They really continue to do that. The simulator is continuing to get enhanced. And so, I'm super proud of the way in which they go about helping the thousands of customers. I think we're over 4,000 customers that we've done that sort of work for. So, incredibly proud of David and the team of our property planners that we have. They're just amazing.
Let us know what you think, folks. Dave was a bit nervous about coming on, but when you hear his performance, there was no reason. He just riffed it off. We just for genuine transparency, we gave him no lead in. We gave him no lead-in questions. We gave him no prep. And I pretty much got him in on the premise, could he talk to one of the case studies? And then you and I sort of bolted on the first 45 minutes of the conversation without him knowing what we're going to say, how we're going to say it.
We're just going to riff it, Dave. Just go with us.
which is yours and my strength when we don't overplan, but we've got to remember that it's not always everyone else's strength. So, which is good. So well done, Dave. Thank you for that. And again, we're super excited about the work that he does. And for those of you that got this far, audio only, you're on a run, you're at the gym, you're on the train, you're driving in the car, I definitely recommend going and finding that sort of 20-minute period where Dave was just running through the simulator. It's a very rare insider's look, Ben, on exactly what we do and how we do it and the outcome. So I'd recommend you go and check that out on YouTube or Spotify. Probably the easiest ways for you to see the visuals on that. So very good. Thank you, Dave. Hey, my life hack today, Ben, is something that I came across. And do you know that time when you've got to get something out of the freezer and you go, oh my gosh, I've left it too late. You put it in the water, all that sort of stuff. I saw this little life hack that I've given a go and it works. So I'm sharing it with the crew. And I'm conscious of the fact that, when I did that little bracelet one, you go, oh, come on, mate, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel. But this one, I reckon, is super practical. So picture this. You have a pot upside down, right? Then you get let's just say it's some mince, and you place the frozen mince on top of the upside down pot. Then you get another pot that's not upside down, normal, and place it on top. And metal conducts heat so efficiently that placing the meat between the two metal pans helps transfer room temperature to the frozen meat quickly, speeding up the thawing process. So let that land. It allows you to use the natural heat conductivity of metal pans to thaw that meat quickly without needing a microwave or water. So it's, last minute pulling out. So let's do it again. You get a pot, tip it upside down, put the mince on top of, the base of the pot that would normally be on the stove.
So two bases between the mince.
Between two bases. Yeah. You just had that confused look, mate. So I was trying to just break it down.
I was trying to work out, wait a minute, some pots have handles and they don't balance upside down. But anyway, we'll get past that.
Oh, mate, you go into the details. Love it.
But I also think that I thought what you were also going to do there was say, now in the boiling water, so all of the heat goes up onto that top plate of the base, and then so that accelerates. No water involved.
Standard room temperature pots.
Got it.
And place it in between. Check it out, folks. Let us know if it works. Last week you said you were going to use my life hack, Ben, so hopefully this week you might, whenever you have to pull the mince out of the fridge or those steaks at the last minute and you forgot to defrost them, try that.
I'd just be going Uber Eats. Yeah.
Hey, this is the point where I normally say to you, all right, mate, what?
I know, here's the alert again.
It's money alert.
This is the money alert. Right. Now, I promised to talk about two things, credit cards and offsets. Let's start firstly with the credit cards. Now, all loan repayments, because remember, when you're using credit, it's not your money, it's the bank's money, have minimum repayments. So whether that's a personal loan, a mortgage, and the credit card. And in theory, the banks want you to just pay the minimum repayment. So let's say you had a minimum of $5,000 of cash in the bank and you had $500 worth of repayments to be made on your credit card. The bank sort of says, well, pay the whole thing out. No, you just make the minimum repayment, which might only be $20 for that month, right? Because they're trying to encourage you to not pay it off, because that's how they make their money, the more interest. So it's really important to understand that's the principles here. And the banks are never ever going to proactively ring you up and say, hey, Ben, you got $5,000 here and you've got $500 balance on your credit card. Why don't we just wipe that balance off? Okay. And so that's why we always talk about setting up auto sweeps. So it always rolls over and gives you that interest-free period of up to 55 days if you've got that type of credit card operating inside your money management solution.
So Ben, just let's what is an auto? You and I know what one is, but let's be super granular. What's an auto sweep?
So normally what would happen if you've got your credit card and your finances in the same institution, you can set up for that institution to automatically pay the outstanding balance of the last month's transaction. So in theory, what happens here is so let's say that's paid off, and the very next day I put a $500 charge on that card, I've effectively got all of that month and then up to that 55-day period to pay that off and incur no interest, right? Yep. Okay, so now, of course, every day that you make transactions after that is not up to 55 days, that's reducing. But what we're trying to talk about here is getting into the hygiene where you never pay interest, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why auto sweeps on credit cards are really, really valuable things. All right, next, and this one's a big one, Bryce, because there's potentially a bit of information that most people know about offset accounts and the power of an offset account. And an offset account is an Australian invention. It's what we built here in Australia. And effectively, it means that any money that you have in a transactional account that will offset your mortgage, if you've got a mortgage pack or a pro pack or an offset feature as part of your mortgage package with your bank. Here's the rub, Bryce. It's become apparent that we haven't necessarily communicated to the broader audience. So we're asking all of our community to keep telling all of their friends and family to make sure that just because you have a bank account with a bank and just because you have a mortgage, if you don't instruct the bank to connect that offset, to connect that transactional account against the mortgage, guess what? The daily interest that you should be saving is not actually happening. And so a lot of people, it's come to my attention that there are people out there who say, I've got a pro pack or I've got a mortgage solution that has an offset account. But if they don't connect that offset, or in some examples where they might have had a fixed rate as well as a variable portion, and then that fixed rate's expired, and they potentially still have two accounts sitting there, and they just automatically think that second account is automatically connected to that mortgage that's just come out of fixed. That is not the case, because when you've got a fixed loan, most fixed loans don't allow access to offset. So you've got to tell the bank, and this is what I was saying before, the banks aren't going to proactively tell you that your $10,000 here or that your $100,000 there or your $1,000 there is going to automatically be connected to save interest. It is not in their best interest, but in their product disclosure documentation, they're very, very clear. So they do tell you in a lot of the collateral that they send you that that's the case, but no one's aware of that. So we're just on a crusade now to just make sure that everyone, if you've got an offset account, make sure it is pointing to the right mortgage account. So it's doing the heavy lifting in terms of reducing your interest, because it's horrible when you work out that it hasn't been the case. But here's my other really important point. And that is, if you don't, right, remember what Money Smarts is all about. We do a monthly checkup. If you're not checking up on your banking, then you're not going to discover that it wasn't connected correctly. And it's your responsibility. Remember, I've just told you the banks are going to say, hey, it's all in our conditions and all in our term, and all in the product disclosure information. So if you don't tell us, we're not going to do it. And, we talked about this before, Bryce. If, the banks are going to say, well, I didn't do it because you didn't tell me to do it. They don't want to get into trouble for not for connecting something that you'd said you didn't want to have connected them. I don't know what reason why you would.
Two camps, isn't there? You could have your cynical camp going, oh, the banks are never going to front foot that. But the other side of it is, from the bank's perspective, is we don't want to correct it to the wrong one, and then you get grumpy at us for doing that. So it's your money alert's super important.
It is. And so if you ever then try and say to make a claim against the bank through AFCA or something along those lines, saying they should have done it, they're saying, hey, we've provided you in the product disclosure information, so it's on you. So you are ultimately accountable for that in terms of what that looks like. So that is the message I've got here. And if you haven't checked your bank statements for a reasonable period of time, please do. And get into a routine that you're checking them at worst every couple of months, because banks make mistakes, or what we've just talked to you about, they don't do the things that you would assume that they would do. They're in the business of making money, right? They want happy customers as well. But at the end of the day, they're in the business of making money for their shareholders. So that is a way in which, if that's not connected, they're making more profits for their shareholders. So please, people, and final message here, inside more, we actually have built in an offset alert. So when you correctly connect your transactional bank account with your mortgage account inside more, when the balance of the offset goes above the balance of the mortgage, it gives you a nice big banner. It gives you a little notification banner to say, hey, just letting you know that you've got more money in your offset than you do in your mortgage. So any additional dollar that's sitting over there isn't doing any of that heavy lifting. So you need to find another home for it, in terms of whether that's in a term deposit or whether that's somewhere else, in terms of looking at, future investing as an example. So please, we're on a crusade. It's happened recently. We've had an experience where, a client didn't realize and wasn't checking their bank statements. And so it's really disappointing for them. And we want to make sure that everyone understands that that's the risk associated with that. And when your broker's setting up your lending to start with, usually that's all connected, and that always should be double checked. The reason why sometimes it doesn't get double checked is things like fixed rate loans or things that happen later on in terms of that administration. So really important message for everyone out there to make sure that if you do have an offset, just check that it's connected to the right loan, so it's reducing your interest.
Well said, mate. So, and just a reminder that a loan account and a transaction account, which is your offset, that transaction account has to be linked.
Has to be linked.
If that link doesn't happen, the offsetting of the money in the transaction account won't be happening against the loan balance in the loan account. Therefore, you will not be saving interest, which is calculated daily, paid monthly. Well said, mate. I think that's a very,
Bryce, you will be making some money on that money in the transactional account, because usually but you're then going to pay tax on that as well. Yeah. So it's never as good as having it linked, to Bryce's point, against the mortgage.
Because you want to save an expense, not create an income. That's
correct.
Important. Oh, mate, that's good. So
good show,
mate.
We're staying under the hour.
Well, no, we blew that out ages ago. We blew that out with Dave, to be honest. But
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Long show, sorry, but we're excited about the year. Yeah. We're trying to deliver the value.
It's a seriously, I think this is a foundational episode for anyone. If they've ever sort of stumbled across our podcast and that's the first one that you listen to, that's a pretty good start.
Yeah, we'd be happy.
That's a pretty good start. So there you go, folks. All right, thanks again to Dave for his contribution today. Folks, if you want to be notified first of our upcoming book, How to Retire on $3,000 per Week, the Property Couch's Playbook for Passive Property Investing, there is a link below. We would love for you to stay on that wait list. We will let you know. You will get in advance notice of the entire market, Ben, to get your hands on that book. And to say we are proud of the way that we have corralled our life's work into that book, into one volume, would be an understatement. Hey, mate, well done. Thanks for bringing your A game today. Until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it.
Only if you act on it. See you next week, folks.